All right, good morning. Good morning. It's early Sunday morning, and I'm launching a new show, kind of a show that's going to be talking about child protective services, mainly child protective services in the news. This show is going to be similar to shows that are on YouTube and on Facebook that follow certain legal topics in the news. And the one that we're going to be following is child protective services in this country and around the world, around the Western world, where they have child protective services uh, outworking, so-called protecting children. We're going to be focusing on child protective services in politics, child protective services in funding, child protective services in lawsuits. There's a huge lawsuit that was just filed here in Los Angeles County. Um, I think the attorney's name is Brian Claypool, and I think he's suing for $75 million. He's trying to sue the county of Los Angeles over the death of a child. And if his allegations are true, it's a stunning indictment of the county of Los Angeles and their child protective services on what happened regarding the death of a child out there in the Lancaster area. In this new segment that we're going to be doing, I'm going to try to do research. My staff is going to be trying to do research on these cases that are filed against CPS, against these social workers, not only in Los Angeles and in California, but all over the country. And we're going to try to get some of the players to come on and join us on live streams, and perhaps talk about the cases and give us their thoughts about what's going on. I am going to try to get plaintiffs' attorneys who are actually suing the state or the counties in these cases, and perhaps even defense attorneys to come on and tell us why their clients are not liable. So that's going to be the focus of this new show, and we're going to also still do our other shows, where we have guest co-hosts answering questions, telling about their experiences. And I'm also going to be doing my regular shows as well, teaching about your civil rights cases, teaching about your CPS cases, trying to get your children back. I'm hoping to have a conversation either today or tomorrow with Miss G, asking her to come back to do her shows on a regular basis. We'll see how that goes. And I don't know if you guys remember, there was an old host that we had that did a civil rights show. Um, and I'm hoping that she'll come back as well. So to start off today, let's talk about child protective services in the news under the Trump administration. Back in early January, I think the Trump administration took a swipe at social services spending that kind of stunned state and local officials and advocates for the poor nationwide. Back in January, the Trump administration ordered a halt to virtually all federal spending on social services, issuing a directive that fought to freeze hundreds of billions, yes, billions of dollars in federal funding. Now, had this been carried through, it would have been, in my opinion, the effective end of child protective services throughout this country. The memo that was released in January of 2025 from the Office of Management and Budget, if that had remained in place for more than a couple of days, the courts were going to temporarily intervene for the immediate pause on all agencies, grants, loans, and other financial assistance programs, much of what much of which kind of focused on keeping struggling families intact. The spending freeze would have affected monthly checks, allowing grandparents to take care of kids. It would have affected foster care, programs helping mothers and fathers reunite their broken families. We call that family reunification services and family maintenance services. It would have affected housing stipends and keeping teens together that are in custody and off the streets, helping homeless teens. In another document, the Office of Management and Budget detailed federal programs subject to this freeze by the Trump administration, including Title 4E of the Social Security Act, which funds foster care directly, as well as the Adoption Assistance Program, child abuse and neglect block grants, and programs designed to educate young adults aging out of the child welfare system. Now, I want to say this, and I don't want to be overly dramatic, but for all of those folks out there that wanted to defund CPS, well, this document and this policy by Trump would have defunded CPS. Now, I'm not here to talk about the pros and cons of defunding CPS. Everybody's going to have their own, spin or opinion about that. But, the new president is cutting everywhere. And this was one of the biggest places that cuts were going to be made. And we're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars. Not millions, billions. And I think I saw another article where it was estimated that this was going to save the taxpayer $400 billion. $400 billion. Can you imagine? It would effectively have ended foster care. It would have effectively ended family reunification services. In my opinion, it would effectively ended the juvenile dependency system that we now know that is in place, protecting or stealing children from their parents, depending on what side of the fence you are looking at this system. There are many other social services that families rely upon that were also on this list of funding that were going to be cut. Head Start, which provides childcare education to low-income families. The Supplemental Nutrition Program for Women, Infants, and Children, known otherwise as WIC, which provides nutrition and health care to pregnant women and their babies and young children, and Section 8 housing vouchers. Now, again, I'm not here to talk about the pros and cons about whether this funding or defunding should take place. I'm just talking about this as an issue that everyone should become aware of. Business has been going as usual with respect to funding a system that many find unfair. And many have been calling for the reform of child protective services over the last few decades. And there was rumor that in his first administration that Trump was going to do something to reform CPS. In my opinion, I don't think anything was ever done to reform. And I'm not sure that we should cut out CPS, but it definitely needs some reform. But this was almost going to be a complete defunding of CPS. So families, across the country are wondering or were wondering whether the child's preschool system is still going to be open, whether they can still take their child to the doctor, whether they still were going to have school meals available. There was an analysis of a bipartisan advocacy group that estimates as much as 300 and maybe 50 billion in funding for the nation's neediest children appears to be in danger. The Trump administration had injected fear and despair into families who depend on services, which, by the way, they've paid for in their taxes to care for their children. Now, that's one argument. There are a lot of arguments out there that say these are funds that are unnecessarily spent on, providing social services at the expense of taxpayers. Well, which side is right? Well, I think the answer probably lies somewhere in the middle. Do we want to completely defund CPS, or do we just want to reform CPS? That's always the question. I think it's going to be I think things are going to have to be taken a long, hard look at, especially with this funding issue, especially in this new administration where things are being cut. We now have no U.S. Department of Education. That's amazing. And I read something the other day and I didn't know this, U.S. Department of Education wasn't invented or established until the Jimmy Carter administration. And since then, Republican presidents have been threatening to close it down. Well, President Trump finally has closed it down. Whether it'll come back in the future or not, I don't know. But at least we all know that in the sights of budget cutting, the welfare system as we know it, may go away or may be defunded to a certain extent. If it is defunded, there'll be less children taken away from parents. On the one hand. On the other hand, there'll be less services given to families that may need services to keep their children safe. What's the answer? I don't have the solution and I don't have the answers for that. I do know that there needs to be reform. I do know that children do need to be protected. I do know that we have a system now that's totally out of control. What do we do? I think you should write your congressman. I think you should write your senator. I think you should write President Trump. Let them know where you stand on these issues. Give it some thought, because these are important issues that I think that we all should have input on. Now, changing the subject. Around the country, I think probably in every state, there are lawsuits pending against Child Protective Services agencies. And as I mentioned earlier at the top of the show, there's a huge lawsuit that was just filed recently in Los Angeles County, $75 million for a family where a child was killed, allegedly at the negligence of social workers in Los Angeles County from an office in an area of Los Angeles County called the Antelope Valley, which is interesting because this particular office has had several high-profile cases over the past few years where children have died. And the county has paid out millions of dollars. And it would seem that there's something going on out there in the Antelope Valley. I don't know if it's coincidence. I don't know if it's, negligence by that particular office, but apparently there are children dying. I was talking to an attorney friend of mine recently who told me, Vince, it's not just happening in the Antelope Valley. It's happening all over Los Angeles County. It's happening all over the state of California. It's happening all over the United States. Now, whether those allegations are true or not, I don't know. But during this new show, we're going to be investigating those types of things. We're going to be doing research on those types of things. And we're going to try to be having people come on the show and join us and talk about those things. We're going to be inviting attorneys on the show. We're going to be inviting attorneys from both sides of this spectrum, both sides, the attorneys that are suing the counties, the attorneys perhaps that are defending the counties. I doubt whether they'll come on, but we're going to invite them, and we're going to try to get to the bottom of this. The Los Angeles Times used to, I don't know if they did it in the past year or two, but they used to do an article every year talking about the amount of money Los Angeles County would pay out every year in lawsuits. And always at the top of the list was the Sheriff Department and the Department of Child Services, Department of DCFS, Department of Children and Family Services. And this article was really geared towards letting the people know, well, there's something going on if year after year after year, these agencies are paying out millions and millions of dollars. The sheriffs, of course, were being sued because of, alleged abuse, civil rights abuse to citizens here in Los Angeles County. And the Department of Children and Family Services were being sued because of neglect or violation of civil rights in these CPS cases. And what the Times was trying to say was, hey, we're losing millions of dollars every year as taxpayers. What's going to happen? What are we going to do to try to fix this problem? And apparently nothing. Because at least in the case of DCFS, when these cases are settled or money's paid out in these judgments, it doesn't come out of the pockets of the alleged quote unquote offenders. Social workers who violate civil rights of children or parents, they don't pay the judgments. Does that surprise you? The county does, and the county pays it, and the county gets that money from the federal government. So if you think, I was talking to somebody recently, and the parent told me, I want to sue the social worker, so the social worker never does this to another family. And I said, well, if that's your rationale for wanting to sue the social worker, you might as well stop, because that's not going to work. I said, I've been doing this almost 40 years. And I said, you suing a social worker, and even if you win through judgment or settlement, that's not going to have any impact on the social worker because they don't pay the judgment. They don't pay the settlement. It doesn't come out of their pocket. I'll give you an example. This happened maybe 6 or 7 years ago. Lady comes to me. Well, first of all, I get a call from a very well-known attorney. He's one of the gurus of civil rights cases against social workers here in California. And he also does cases outside of California. But anyway, he calls me. We belong to the same group, trial attorneys group. Anyway, he calls me up and he says, Vince, I'm in trial right now in a federal case against social workers. And as soon as I finish this trial, I have to go to do another trial. And I'm just too busy. Imagine this. He's really too busy doing cases against social workers. Is he really that busy? Yes, he's really that busy. He's got a lot of cases suing social workers. There's that much alleged mischief by social workers violating civil rights. So he's too busy. He goes, Vince, I have this great case. I just can't do it. I want you to do this case for me. You take the client. He says, I don't want anything. I'll give you all the support and help you need to my form banks, any question strategies, anything like that. So I take on the case. Case plods along, and then we get to the deposition of the social worker. And we're probably maybe 3 months away from the trial date. And up until this point, the defense attorneys have been telling me repeatedly, oh, you don't have a case. You don't have a case. You don't have a case. We'll give you $5,000. It's nuisance value. We'll give you $10,000. It's nuisance value. But we're not going to give you anything more. Well, I take the deposition of the social worker. And during that deposition, the social worker admits to lying in reports that she wrote up that were presented to the court. She admits it. And I take about an hour maybe to ask her the questions about lying in 100 different ways. Because I know that her smart attorneys are going to try to misconstrue and to twist what she has told me on videotape in the deposition with the stenographer recording everything that she says. Well, after the deposition, her attorney, one of the best defense attorneys, in town, says, hey, Vince, I'd like to talk to you after everyone leaves. Okay. So he tells me, he says, Vince, you probably have had more fun than any attorney deserves to have on any case. And I'm thinking, like, what is he talking about? And I realize he's talking about the fact that the social worker has admitted to lying. And he's talking about that the social worker has filed false declarations to a court, to a federal judge in downtown Los Angeles. And he tells me, hey, why don't we go to mediation again? No, he doesn't suggest mediation. He suggests taking me out to dinner to my favorite steak restaurant here in town. And let's talk about settlement. Now, and I told him, I said, well, you guys have only offered $10,000. My client's not going to accept that. He says, oh, no, no, no. I'm sure I can convince the county. We can give you more money. Okay, I'll go out to dinner. It's a steak dinner. What the hell? So I go out to dinner with this guy, and we talk. We get to know each other. We don't talk nothing about the case. And after dessert, he says, well, I got the county to authorize a little more for the settlement. And he tells me the number, and I say to him, I don't think my client's going to accept that. He says, but I'm sure you'll convince her. And I said, well, I'm not going to convince her of anything. If she says she doesn't want to accept it, I'm not going to accept it. We're not going to accept it. What he didn't know was we were in the process of making a motion to strike the answer of that particular social worker. And if we were successful on striking the answer of that social worker, we would win the case automatically. The only issue would be how much we would win. We would win the case automatically. The only issue would be how much we would win. So I asked my client, hey, blah, blah, blah. She says, no, I reject that. The lady admitted at your deposition on videotape that she lied. Yeah, she did. She admitted that. Under penalty of perjury, she lied. So, I tell the attorney, no, my client doesn't want to do it. He says, well, why don't we go back to mediation? We'll pay. Mediation with these professional mediators can cost thousands of dollars. I'm talking about mediation. I just got a mediation bill on a case. It was, I think, $8,000, and so they're not cheap. He says, we'll pay for mediation. And I'm kind of chuckling to myself, I'm thinking, I bet you will pay for mediation. So we file that motion that I was just telling you about. We go to mediation, and he says, you pick the mediator. And we pick the mediator, retired federal judge, very well-known gentleman. And the judge settles the case for a huge amount of money. And the moral of that story is that they paid that settlement, and they usually pay these settlements prior to trial, after the defense attorney has made all the money, billing the county, because they can't afford to go to trial. They can't afford to let a jury hear that a social worker lied under penalty of perjury to a judge over there in children's court, or lied to a federal judge over there in downtown LA. They can't afford to do it. Imagine if you were on a jury and you were sitting there listening to evidence, and you found out that a social worker lied under penalty of perjury in order to take or keep children away from a parent. You'd probably be outraged, and you probably want to give this family millions of dollars. Unfortunately, in my case, I didn't want to settle the case. The client wanted to settle the case. And the settlement judge, who I underestimated, because, that's how attorneys are. We think we know as much as the next attorney. At that time, I think I was like, maybe a 35-year attorney going against, and the settlement judge was like, a 50-year attorney. The judge convinced my client to accept the settlement because it was life-changing money. And honestly, it was life-changing money. But I thought the case was worth much more because of the egregious conduct of the social worker. I mean, imagine a social worker lying under penalty of perjury in the state court and in the lawsuit itself in front of the federal court. I mean, it's outrageous. Had my client done that, they would have thrown her under the bus. As a matter of fact, after that case, or before the case was even settled, my client filed a federal civil rights case with the Department of Justice against the social worker for lying under penalty of perjury. If she had lied under penalty of perjury, she'd be in jail right now. You know what they responded? This is your federal government. They responded that we're not going to take any action because this happened during civil rights litigation. So the moral of that story was, if you're a social worker and you lie and you later get caught and you get sued, the Department of Justice isn't going to do anything about it. Now, there was a case in Orange County, this is several years ago, where I got the feeling, I won't quote the Orange County director, but I got the feeling the Orange County director thought it was okay to kind of twist or bend the truth if you were protecting children. It's all right to do anything when you're protecting children because, you're doing God's work. To hell with the children, to hell with the parents and their rights. But, we're doing God's work and we're protecting children. Anyway, I digress. So we are going to be talking about lawsuits in this new series. These segments are going to be videotaped and taped, and they'll be on all the social media channels that we have 24/7, 365, forever. They will live. We also are going to start transcribing them. You'll be able to get the transcriptions. Now with artificial intelligence, getting transcriptions is, as easy as clicking a button. So we'll have those for you. Hopefully, those of you that are interested in civil rights litigations against your social worker, these segments will be helping you as well. So the only bad part about this is because my days are so busy, we're going to be trying to do these segments every day at 6:30 a.m., but we're going to be doing them 7 days a week, hopefully. I have a staff that's going to be helping me, and we're going to be researching and providing information. It's not going to be your typical, how to do this, how to do that. It's going to be more discussions about the politics and the policies and the news of civil rights cases and civil rights litigations against CPS all over the country. We have a question here I see from Kimberly on YouTube. What if a parent files appeals and of course fails on their own? Can you come in and still file a lawsuit? Kimberly, fortunately or unfortunately, in the state of California and probably in the United States as a whole, you can always file a lawsuit. Are you going to win? That's a totally different question. And I can't answer that question without looking at your file. Me giving an answer to that question is like, your doctor giving you an opinion about your health without looking at your medical chart or x-rays or blood tests or urine tests, something without taking your blood pressure or your pulse. Doctor can't do it, right? And I can't do it without looking at your legal file. So, Kimberly, my telephone number is right there on the screen, bottom left, 888-888-6582. If you want to get a consult or you want to send me some documents to look at, maybe I can give you a intelligent opinion about your case. All right, folks, so we're coming up on the end of the show. This is only going to be a 30-minute show every morning. And we'll be having handouts and stuff. I'm going to try to get a copy of that $75 million lawsuit by attorney Brian Claypool that was filed against DCFS here in the county of Los Angeles. And I'm going to try to post that on our Facebook and YouTube channels, and everyone can get a copy of that. And maybe you can use that, but you'll be able to see what's going on in that case. The guy makes some almost unbelievable allegations against the county. I mean, they're believable to me because I know what happens in these cases, but I mean, it's incredible what's happened, what's going on with these people and these children, and you know, um, we're supposed to have a system that's supposed to be protecting children, and unfortunately, we're falling short on that. Okay, well, thank you, everyone. It's early Sunday morning, and thank you for joining. And we'll see you tomorrow morning, live at 6:30 a.m. and every morning, hopefully at 6:30 a.m. You guys have a good rest of the day. See you tomorrow. Bye bye.